Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. After a little bit of difficulties that we have conquered, I am absolutely honored to have the special guest today for the very first time on my channel, Mr. Jan Oberg, or Oberg, if I pronounce correctly, who is internationally known. Was it good? Yes? Researcher, mediator, peace commentator, and also a photographer, someone who loves art.
I am guilty of much, yes.
Yes, and as I often say, paraphrasing after Dostoevsky, beauty will save the world. So art is a crucial part of our existence, but we will not start this conversation with art, with other topics. Thank you so much, Jan, for finding time to join me today.
And well, if you thank you so much for finding me.
If you can let the audience know, I attach your website already down below the live stream. Is this the best place to find you and follow your work?
Transnational.live, yes. Then I have a personal blog, and then I'm on the Transnational Foundation is on Substack. And well, that's about it. And I do have a rather comprehensive homepage for my photography and art. So, yeah.
Great. So let me start with two predictions that you made in one of your latest videos, one of the latest interviews. So let's start with the first one. You said that 85% of the world sees what NATO, European Union, and United States are doing, and they will turn their backs to the West. So I would like to ask you, I was thinking about this today. When they turn this back to the West, is West just going to move on with this, or how are they going to respond to those backs being turned against them, in your opinion?
Well, how do you respond when you get weaker and your children don't obey orders anymore, and you have opposition, and you feel that the last you're really strong on is the military, whereas economically, politically, in terms of international law and legitimacy, you are going down. It can lead to a recognition that we have to change. We have to join the others, and it could lead to let's blow up the whole thing because we have lost. I don't know where it will end. But let me just say that there are a number of fall factors that I think we are seeing internationally. I'm not talking about, necessarily how the United States and the Western world is falling apart from inside. It also is because of economic and other troubles and the media. But, for all these years, you've had lost wars, tremendous investments in wars, but you lost every war since Vietnam. And that creates hatred against the West. And it drains the economy. I'd actually like at some point in our conversation to talk a little bit about economics and militarism, because the two are so little discussed related to each other. Then you've had things like the response to 9/11 23 years ago, which have not, the idea of killing terrorists instead of doing something about terrorism. And that has incurred a lot of wars, particularly in the Middle East. Hundreds, thousands, or millions of people have been displaced and killed and wounded. And we've not solved the problem. Terrorism still exists. For instance, the United States has bases now in Syria illegally because they think they can fight terrorists there. And we never asked in 9/11, why did they do it? What the Americans asked is, how was it done and who did it, but not why it was done. And that would have been a key to a completely different policy. So that started out with the attack on Afghanistan. By the way, also October 7 as the Hamas attack on Israel. Now, next you have NATO's expansion, taking advantage of the fact that the Soviet Union fell apart, breaking all the promises that all the Western leaders gave Gorbachev that NATO would not expand, And then, stupidly enough, also trying not only, Montenegro and Croatia and lesser problems from the Russian point of view, but also insisting that Ukraine should get in. So for 30 years, NATO has been in Ukraine, and Ukraine has not entered NATO and will not, in my view, enter NATO. Lots of people predicted warfare if they continued that way. Then comes Nord Stream, the destruction of Nord Stream, which is a huge issue that has been put a lid on by the Western media. It came up today because the Swedish government, the public prosecutor, decided to close down the investigation with a very enigmatic one single argument. We do not have, Sweden does not have jurisdiction over that area, in spite of the fact that it is an exclusive economic zone of Sweden. This is bizarre. And then you have, of course, the Ukraine war, which is a Russia-NATO war that Ukraine is paying a price for, if you will. There's more to it than that, but I can't get into those details. And then finally, Gaza. Gaza being done, the genocide in Gaza being done by an ally, the closest ally of the United States, and with the Western 15% looking on and even supporting it, instead of putting down the foot and said, we got to talk. So, these factors are not factors of strength. These factors are not visionary. That's not a good leader. Those factors that I mentioned here, 5 or 6 of these fall factors, are all indicators of weakness. Moral weakness, legal weakness, economic weakness, political weakness, but militarism. And that's one of the classical theories of why empires go down. You can go to Toynbee, you can go to others. They will tell you that overextension, militarism, lack of legitimacy in the eyes of others, etc., are clear indicators of decline and a coming fall. Now, I hope that fall will be sensible, graceful. Like when the Soviet Union broke down, unfortunately, we do not have a Gorbachev in the Western world who could handle. He was cheated, but he tried to handle it in a very, very statesman-like way. The fact that his system broke down. We should have pulled down NATO at that time and created a common European system. So that was a long answer to your first question. Sorry.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But the second prediction you made, which I agree with, we will militarize ourselves to death. And with that, I would like to ask you, knowing how currently the situation in Europe looks like economically, how do you see the future of NATO and how this even can be possible to militarize ourselves? I think we're going to die before we militarize ourselves.
Well, that depends on what we mean by die. I mean die as a vibrant, convivial society and a democracy. I'm old enough to tell you that I have heard all my life, and since the 50s, that the Russians are coming. I've heard it in Denmark, where I was born. I've heard it in Sweden, where I live, and I've heard it all over in the political debate. The Russians are coming. Now, these pesky Russians have not come. You can't trust these guys because they're not doing what we expect them to do. They have not come to a NATO country. The only answer NATO as an alliance has is more weapons and deterrence. And then some blah, 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 blah about we also want, stability, security, and peace. Now, if you look at it, you have an organization that has existed since 1949, promising the taxpayers of its member states that we will create peace. Look at where we are today. We're in the most dangerous situation 1945, created partly, not only, partly by NATO's expansion. This is a Himalayan mistake of the NATO leadership to have tried what they tried to do, which does not legitimate in my eyes that Russia invaded Ukraine, but that's another story. So you pour in money, more weapons, more weapons, more weapons. I have to tell you the following, all this money, about this you can say, you cannot eat your cake and have it too. When you spend money on this, you cannot spend it on social welfare, culture, schools, etc. Secondly, military investments are destructive outside the military industry. For civil society, it is destructive. If you put $100 into military industry, it gives very little employment because the investment will be done in capital intensive equipment, machinery, research, etc. Whereas if you put $100 into the health sector, cultural sector, schools, private companies, etc., you will yield both employment and consumption that produces more employment. So it's totally destructive and negative for the civilian economy outside the military industry. There are no studies ever made that proves that the military is good for the civilian economy, compared to, I should say, similar civilian investments. So what we get is we get more and more militarism, armament, war planning, and all that. We get less security. That's very documentable in today's Europe. And we get an undermining of the civilian economy and welfare of the people. That's where I say, if you do that these things long enough, you're going to die as a society because you consume yourself like a drug addict with weapons. I've said that for the last 20 years, and it has accumulated, it has accelerated very much the last few years. There is no more diplomacy in the Western world. There is only, whether you take Ukraine, you take another conflict, you take Gaza, pouring weapons, threaten this and threaten that, appoint somebody to be a new threat like China. Now, I tell you, good-hearted people believe that there are some very serious and intelligent people who sit down and look at what threatens their society. And then politicians make a judgment about which threats can we do something about, which threats are too big to do something about, which threats are so small that unlikely that we cannot, but don't have to invest in it. And then you allocate some resources. You call that a defense budget in your government. Now, that is not how it works. The whole system builds on fearology. You construct the threat after you found out how much your military industry and your bureaucracy and your military, industrial, media, academic, MIMAC elites need. And then you say, oh my God, it's a big threat. Now, you look at Russia today. Russia's military expenditures before Ukraine was 8% of NATO. Secondly, we're now seeing them operate for 2 years in southern and eastern Ukraine. I mean, it's not very impressive for a superpower. It is not very threatening for the rest of Europe. I'd like to see whether the Russians would be able to go, as they say in Denmark and Sweden now, and attack and succeed and occupy and administer these countries next to it. It also never invaded a neutral country such as Austria or Switzerland or Sweden and Finland when they were neutral. So the whole thing is built on somebody coming up saying on media, you must be prepared for war, the world is dangerous. It has nothing to do with the reality. It's calm hysterics. If you ask me, it's calm hysterics who run this show. And that is, unless somebody comes up and say, the emperor has no clothes, this will go on until we have a huge catastrophe, either civilian breakdown, mass protests, people who cannot find commodities anymore on the shelves, back to your question, or a major war. This cannot go on forever. That is obvious. I'm a sociologist and a peace and future researcher. I've seen enough the last 70 years.
So Jan, thank you. If people don't buy into the fear, they have nothing to proceed with as far as militarization. If people don't buy into the false narrative.
Yes, and that's why I talk about the military industrial media academic complex, because these are the interests that at elite level, not human citizen level, but at elite level, come together and say, we have a common interest. The media today in the Western world are buying, the mainstream media, of course, that's public service, etc. Swedish television, Danish television, I follow them every day, are all for war. They never ask a critical question about Nord Stream, about the United States policies, about NATO's activities. They never say, like, are we really going to have a huge military exercise given the economic crisis of Europe at the moment? They never ask questions about the background of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And maybe, I mean, what media do is they look at violence, they look at destroyed bodies or destroyed cities or destroyed houses or infrastructure. What we should do, and which none of them do, is look at the underlying conflict. But you know, you can sell blood and drama and destruction. You cannot sell somebody who would tell you what it is about at a lower level. Underneath all the violence they love to tell us about, which also creates fear and motivates more armament. Underneath those that type of violence that is visualized by war reporting, we have no peace reporting. That is what we should do, because it's the underlying conflict that permits us to stop the violence. As long as we just say more weapons on our side, they say more weapons on their side, we say more weapons than on our side, etc., where do we end? Instead of looking at, I mean, a doctor who just looks at symptoms is an idiot. He should not be a doctor. A doctor makes a diagnosis and say, where does the pain come from? And we should ask, where does the pain in today's Ukraine come from? That is the underlying conflict. And that's what no prime minister, no government has one single person who is an expert in conflict analysis and peace, reconciliation, mediation, peacemaking, and that sort of civilian conflict resolution. But they have legal experts who can legitimate their illegal policies, and they have military expertise who tell them what to do. The word peace has disappeared the last few years from politics, research, and media. The word peace is a dirty word. I'm happy to speak about it.
Thank you. It's a mind control, and from there, creating fear, and from there, militarizing, and creating the reality for people. I have two more questions for you. If we have time, maybe one more. I would like to ask you, since I actually happened to live in Sweden many, many years ago, and I remember how clean and safe and organized the country was. You are currently in Sweden, correct?
Yeah, I'm sitting in Lund in the southern part of Sweden. Yes, correct.
How is at this moment life in Sweden, the current situation? How do Swedish people feel with the number of migrants, with safety, with social systems? Can you share with us? How is it?
Well, what I can observe as a citizen is that much of society doesn't work the way it did before. The values that probably you experienced in Sweden, such as neutrality, decency, international law is important for small countries, common security that the Olof Palme Commission presented, it's totally gone. There's nothing. There's no intellectual content anymore in foreign and security politics. The trains don't go on time. The postal services are lousy. And you have now a country that with less than 50% of the people joined NATO, want to join NATO. It will probably happen when Hungary says yes. And without any public discussion worth a democracy, the leadership of Sweden sent an application for NATO and has also behind the backs of the people just made a bilateral agreement with the United States about 17 American base facilities throughout Sweden. All of them, like in Denmark, under American jurisdiction, not Swedish jurisdiction. It's giving away its sovereignty. Now, this is something that I can tell you when I came to Sweden more than 50 years ago, and I've lived here in Lund since then. That would have been a fantasy. That would have been an evil scenario for the country. That today you totally without moral and intellectual principles. Let me tell you, quote, quoting the prime minister at the time, Magdalena Andersson, when she came out from the parliament that had decided to send the application to NATO for membership last year. She said, there are many things, and I quote, there are many things we Swedes can disagree about, but there's one thing we agree on, and that is that we love our Sweden. Therefore, that Sweden is worth defending, and we want it now to be defended in NATO. End of quotation. Now, if you are selling a change of politics over 200 years that have served Sweden well, with that kind of populist, no, I won't call it bullshit, it's not diplomatic, but nonsense, it tells everything about where we are in this country. It just a good month ago, we had the annual conference for the Military Industrial Media Academic Complex of Sweden up in the north, a place called Sälen. Now, they are all coordinated, ministers, prime ministers, defense ministers, the leadership of the military and the media, all saying, following to people, to the citizens of Sweden, are you prepared for war? What will you do if what happened in Ukraine will happen to Sweden? This is the chief of defense who goes out and say these things. Now,
can I ask you
what
here?
do
Can I
they-
ask you here? Yeah.
Just let me give you the round of it of the Military Industrial Media Academic Complex. Not one media problematized those things. I did a small article. I sent it to 30 media plus the ministers. I have yet to get one single response back. So there is no discussion anymore. There's one narrative, and that is the Russians are coming. We need the US, we need the bases, we need NATO membership as fast as possible. And the prime minister went down to NATO's headquarters, gave a press conference with Mr. Stoltenberg on the third day he was a prime minister, and he said, Sweden will live up to all its obligations in NATO, including NATO's nuclear doctrine. Now, the prime minister did not have a mandate anywhere in Sweden for saying that. So that's Sweden today, somewhat different from the one you knew.
It's scary different. What I wanted to ask you, Jan, how average citizen reacts to it, how people feel. Do they feel there is really a threat? Do they feel, yes, this is the right thing to do, or they just don't buy it, they don't believe in it, or they ignore it?
That's, of course, a combination. I mean, I can't sit here and say that I know how people in Sweden react, but those I know, people around me, etc., basically still believe what they hear on the mainstream media, particularly the older generation. Secondly, the Swedes have a long tradition for believing what they hear from Stockholm, whereas the Danes are more, voluntaristic and say, well, we do things ourselves in the provinces. And third, when you massively do propaganda on your own people about how dangerous the world is and who is going to attack us very soon if we don't, do all the things, it requires a lot of the person who comes home from work, has to cook his dinner, family dinner, and put the children to bed, to also sit down in the evening and study other sources. They go to primetime public service television, and that's where they get the news and their worldview. I can't blame them for that. I'm spending my life trying to understand it in a broader perspective because that's my profession. But I wouldn't be able to get those insights if I had a normal workday of 8-9 hours and transport back and forth, and then have the energy to penetrate how I'm being fooled or manipulated or deceived. So what I hope for is, and I see small signs of that now in the media, people, for instance, are very upset about the fact that Sweden has also decided not to support UNRWA in Gaza. And they're very upset by the fact that for more than 100 or about 100 years, the Swedish government have given small sums to peace organizations to make it look like at least that we have a kind of public debate and we help those who cannot earn money. So, a peace organization and Women for Peace and whatever, God normally has over the years gotten a small support from the Swedish government, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Our little foundation got it for a few years in the 90s, and then we were thrown out because we knew too much about Yugoslavia and protested the bombing of Yugoslavia. So we are totally independent and we'll never have state support from anyone. And I see now, for instance, in today's newspapers, there is an article by, I think, 30 organizations protesting the fact that a tiny, tiny sum, I think it's 20 million or less than that of Swedish kroner, compared with 120 billion Swedish kroner for the military, that has been taken away. They want to quell, they want to kill every kind of debate. So, that is a very dangerous situation for a democracy, in my view. So I do see opposition, but at this moment it's not strong enough to really change things. But at some point, politicians will have to listen. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Thank you. Last question is about Gaza.
Mhm.
In your opinion, it's kind of a rhetorical question, really, but when you look, especially at this moment, at the images, what's going on there, in my opinion, there is nothing that can justify this cruelty. So what is the point at this moment to continue with this?
Well, you should ask in Washington and in Tel Aviv, I suppose. But as I see it, it is a total double standard. I mean, the whole Western world got very upset about what Russia did in Ukraine, cut all relations, sanctions like never before in human history, etc. When it comes to Israel's cruelty, and it is cruelty, as you say, that's the only reasonable word for it, with 27,000 people killed in a couple of months and more than 100,000 people destroyed, almost 2 million having fled, being displaced, and a systematic killing of life opportunities such as water and electricity and all that. There's no doubt that that is a unique cruelty. It's the worst genocide we've seen in the Western world since 45. And I think that there's simply a lack of understanding of what is going on, because the West has been used to get its way, to cover up for things that should not have been covered up from the Vietnam War and onwards. But today you have social media, you have various types of media, you have millions of bloggers, you have people who know a lot. And it's much more difficult now to get to say we were wrong, we are changing the policies. And then Israel has, as we all know, a special place in the Western world in its self-perception. So I don't know when this will stop, but it must stop. And I can tell you I'm personally part of an international global conscience initiative that has been started by Professor Richard Falk, emeritus of Princeton University, and the former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Turkey, Ahmet Davutoglu. And we just met last weekend in London, and there's now a kind of plan for how we can mobilize opinion. It's all small and very low financed initiatives, but if millions of people around the world do that, just listen to Gandhi. If we are sufficiently many working for nonviolence, we will change the system. The problem is that we need critical mass. You have that in physics, but critical mass among human beings. There must be sufficiently many people protesting in the streets, and it doesn't matter too much whether the media monitor the millions of people who are protesting against what is happening in Gaza. It will go through. It will go through at some point. There will be a breaking point in which the nonviolent opposition to the madness going on at the moment, including the militarism, will happen. I'm totally convinced about that. People are not stupid, but it takes a long time to see how bad the system is and how necessary it is that I begin to do something if I'm an ordinary citizen. So I'm pessimistic on the short run, but I'm very optimistic in the long run, because then when the US empire has gone down, NATO has fallen apart, militarism has stopped in that way. There's no doubt that the world's militarism is centered in NATO and its member states and not elsewhere. When that happens, we'll get a multipolar world. We will get a world in which we cooperate. in which it's permitted to be different, in which there will be no new empire. The US empire is the last empire. Nobody's so stupid to believe that you can control the rest of the world with your own system, whether Mother Teresa or Gandhi or Hitler or whatever. It's impossible. The rest of the world won't have it. And also, it's not in the genes of the Chinese to make others look like them. They are very proud of being themselves, like the Japanese. They don't want the mission. They don't have the mission idea. The Western world has the terrible combination of the Christian mission, the Bible. You must be like us. You must believe in our values. And if you don't do it voluntarily, then we have a sword also. Now that type of stuff will be over. It'll be over with the decline and fall of the United States. I don't know how long time it'll take, but I think it goes very fast at the moment, and that makes me optimistic. And let me finally say, I have never, ever been anti-American. I've grown up in an Americanized world. I've been to the United States a lot. I work with Americans every day. I collect American art. I mean, I'm sorry, I have never been anti-American. I'm anti-imperialism, anti-militarism, anti-racism. And the better for the US, the sooner it leaves its empire and its 600 plus bases around the world. That would be a fantastic society the day they relieve themselves of that burden. And I can't wait to see a wonderful, new, pioneering, creative, and visionary United States after its empire and after its illusionary ideas about dominating the world. That is self-destruction. Nobody's out to destroy the Western world. It's all doing it by itself. And that's very sad. That makes me sad to even say it.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much for coming on today. I very, very much appreciate your time. The link to find Mr. Oberg is down below the live stream. And yeah, to be honest, I don't really, I have approached to this way. I believe we have to strengthen our spirit, not give into fear, speak the truth, be authentic, and do our part in this. Not to be afraid anymore to say what you think, what you believe in, because people still are. And I think in this very core basic level, that's also where the problem lies. If each one of us just have a spine and speaks from the heart and strengthens the spirit, one by one, we can actually change the future. I believe in this, truly I do.
We completely agree with each other. And saying this on a screen in a media situation makes you very unique because you belong to a peace journalist or the group of people who think differently also about solutions, because that's one of the things we never get in the media. We never get somebody who talks about possible solutions. We get people who only talk about how bad things are, which is another way of threatening people into passivity. So thank you for saying these things. I'm a total believer in rational thinking, analytical, intellectual thinking, because that's one part of me and as a peace researcher over 45 years, but it's also, there's also a reason for why I do art. And that's because it is not rational, it's intuitive. And because I've grown up with art and I could not live without the world of contemporary art. So in my view, art will last much longer, whereas politics, warfare, militarism and all that is a short-lived illusion. So
yes.
we join hands in what you're saying.
Thank you. And art is food for the soul, and without soul, we have nothing.
I agree. And that will come, it's a sad thing to see OECD's latest report about how humanities, the study of humanities at our Western universities have been cut down. There's even a sentence in the British government saying it's of low importance. You cannot be more wrong. The humanities, things that cannot be sold on a market, is the most important thing of all. And destruction is not important. Construction is important. Negative thinking is not important. Constructive thinking is important. So hopefully we will learn from Oscar Wilde, who said, we are now in a situation where everybody knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Let's imagine that sooner or later people will rise and find out the value of the things we cannot put on a marketplace and put a price on. And that's what you say, the soul, it's the spirit, it's creativity, it's all the things that will last. Whereas warfare and destruction will not last. It'll only be self-destructive. So thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Tack så mycket. And
Tack så
hej då.
mycket. Hej
Thank you,
då.
everyone. Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone, for
much.
watching. I have viewers from Sweden as well. So thank you, everyone. And until next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.